Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Writing Podcast. I'm your host Adam, and I'm here with Lindsay Broker. Again, if you were watching live earlier, we just went off the air an hour ago, and we're back already. I swear we're not completely crazy. I'm going to be doing a move soon, so we're trying to, pack the schedule full of episodes for you guys to listen to and watch during the few weeks that we're off air during the move. But we do have another really good one here for you. I've been wanting to get someone on like this for a while. We have Helen Sedwick on the show. Helen, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Our pleasure, for sure. And Helen has a unique perspective because she is both an author and she's on the legal side of things here. So she's going to be discussing a lot of the legal aspects of everything, self-publishing, and we're going to ask her a lot of things about everything from book covers and copyright to maybe talk a little bit about incorporating or things to protect yourself, sort of thing. So we're going to ask you all kinds of good stuff. But before we get all into that, I wanted to ask you how you got started in all this, especially the the law side of self-publishing, or writers in general, if it's not self-publishing specific.
Oh, certainly. Although I've been a writer for many years, I've also been a closet novelist, writing whenever I had the time. And then in 2008 and 9 and 10, I started working very hard on a novel that really captured me. And kept pitching it around, getting good responses, but didn't sell it. It's the classic story every writer will tell you, of getting encouraging responses but no buys. So then in 2012, I decided to self-publish that novel. And self-published, it's Coyote Wins. Here it is. And when I self-published this novel, which was a great experience, I became really aware that how much self-publishing was starting a business. And I would get questions from other writers about starting businesses, about copyright issues, about sales tax issues. And when I looked for resources to direct people to, I became very aware that there was no handbook out there to help writers, especially self-publishing writers, deal with all the legal issues. They're kind of widespread. None of them are that complicated, but if you don't know they're there, it's so easy to make a mistake. So last year, in 2014, I wrote and again self-published the Self-Publisher's Legal Handbook. You have it here. Kind of there we go. The Self-Publisher's Legal Handbook, and to help writers. It covers everything from setting up your business, how to get an employer ID number, a tax certificate, to some of the more esoteric issues of copyright and defamation, and even some advice on how you can structure your self-publishing or writing business to help you save on taxes. And it's been great. The irony is it's probably outsold my novel 10 to 1. But it's gotten great responses, and I'm getting invitations to talk at conferences because it seems like this was a niche that needed to be filled.
Yeah, for sure. And, all the time you see on writers' forums and things, people ask even what seems like a basic legal question about self-publishing or copyright or any of those things, about starting a business, incorporating, things like that. And there's so many different points of advice on there that are even conflicting, and all of them, of course, at the end say, your results may vary, though, don't listen to me, I don't know for sure. So, like you said, it is really hard to get a straight real answer out there without really digging a lot. So now, of course, you said people were coming to you because you were already in the legal field, and you're an attorney, is that right?
I am an attorney. I've been an attorney for 30 years, yes. Mostly, I don't go to court. I'm the kind of attorney that I do contracts and businesses. I work with businesses.
Okay.
So I read contracts all the time and deal with business structure issues.
Okay, awesome. So, and you said you work with businesses, so I'm guessing you already have a lot of experience with small business startups and things like that. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. And entrepreneurs, people who have a dream and they're trying to build this business in their dream. So and my parents were artists. which is another, and I think so I'm very sympathetic to writers and other artists and helping them protect their rights and turn their dream into something positive.
Right. And so with that, you've probably dealt with lots of different kinds of businesses and startups. I mean, is it an exact parallel to self-publishing? Do you see it as, they're both, a lot of authors are starting to realize that their writing is a business. They really want to make money from it. They really need to treat it like a business. So is there a lot of parallels between that and a traditional business? Are there a lot of differences? Or
the biggest difference is the one you just mentioned. When I work with businesses, they know they're a business. They are already past that. When I work with writers and other artists, I often have to drag them into business thinking and to seeing that this is a business, and they're intimidated by it. So I spend a lot of time trying to assure writers that they shouldn't be intimidated by these issues. Any writer who can understand characterization and pacing and plot can understand enough of these legal issues to really protect themselves. And I think once they understand them and they're not so scary, it's empowering for a writer. So that's where the difference is I have to convince writers to open up their minds to these issues. But once you're past that, it's very similar.
right, and I get that a lot too. You do see people that are, it's art, not business sort of thing. It's hard to separate themselves from the work, whereas anywhere else, you don't really have to, if you have someone that's running a restaurant, they don't have to separate themselves from the food. It's not like every dish going out is work of art or whatever. So,
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to, this kind of segues pretty nicely before I pass you over to Lindsay, because I don't want to step on too many of her questions that I know she has written down for you, is you see a lot of advice. I mentioned before on forums, you have people asking things all the time about legal advice for authors, and the most common one I see is when to incorporate or what kind of corporation to make, whether you should, and the advice that's often given is there's a certain threshold of income, but that seems kind of weird to me because then you don't get the protection until you get to that number. So I want to talk a little bit about that and when authors should look at maybe incorporating or making an LLC or whatnot, and at what stage they should do that, the beginning or?
In my view, authors should not do it at the beginning. Some of it depends on what state you're in. In California, to form a corporation or an LLC costs $800 a year. So that's very expensive. If you want additional protection against potential liabilities, and I'll come back to what those liabilities could be, then for less money, you can buy a business liability insurance policy. And that's going to do more good for you than being incorporated or being an LLC. Because if you have an insurance policy, they hire the attorneys and they deal with the claim. So for many authors, if you're writing in a high-risk area, then your dollars will go further if you buy insurance. If you're incorporated, you still have, and you get sued, you still have to hire the attorneys and do all the defense, so it really doesn't provide you very much protection. And most writers don't need that protection. They're writing fiction where there isn't a high risk of defamation or infringement issues. You're not. If you use some general practical advice avoiding defamation, you probably don't have a lot of risk. Why there's a dollar threshold? Because if you're making tens of thousands of dollars a year on your writing, then you may want to set up an entity like a corporation or an LLC to save on taxes. But it doesn't make any sense until you get to that threshold.
Okay, that makes sense. So for tax purposes, save money, you shouldn't do the incorporating until that point. It varies a lot by state, you said as well. But as far as
it is, because you have to, for instance, in California, unless you know you're going to save at least $800 in taxes each year, probably more, it doesn't make sense to incorporate because your savings are all going to be eaten up by your $800 fee.
That makes sense. And so you said that the liability insurance is more important maybe for nonfiction. So where do you see that the high risk genres or high risk things that people write about where they would more often need that liability insurance than say fiction authors?
I think nonfiction, particularly if you're going after what I say, big data, big food, big medicine, Wall Street. I think these books and these writings are important, this kind of investigative journalism, or you're really exposing injustices that need to be exposed. But if you're going after some deep pockets, I not only recommend that you get liability insurance, but that among your consultants is an attorney who knows what you're doing and has advised you on how to take smart risks and how to avoid unnecessary risks.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense, especially like you said, if you're writing about a corporation or anything like that. But so in fiction work, especially with things like thrillers or things like that, a lot of those come into play also. So for fiction works, I notice, of course, everyone pretty much in the front of their book will put that preface in there that says, all this is work of fiction, any names mentioned. Does that actually give any protection putting that in the front of the book, or does that just make the author feel better?
It makes the author feel better. And if you didn't put it in, that might call more attention to itself. That people they worry that someone's going to recognize a character that's based upon a real person. And that makes, or in a memoir, it might actually be the real person. Just the fact that somebody is recognizable in your book, that's not a problem by itself. It becomes a problem if you're making what could sound like very damaging statements about that person's, and that could affect their reputation. And if those statements are false, or if those statements reveal very private information, then there could be some risk. But if you're just using somebody's quirks in your character, that's not going to rise to a level of being a legal action. I mean, that's just comes with the territory.
Right. So
that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So the preface at the beginning of all these books may not really protect you, but if you don't have it there, it'll probably throw up some more flags because everyone has it, like we said. So
yes, you might as well just put that extra paragraph in there.
It's just a copy and paste anyway, right? It doesn't take you long. So
That's right.
all right. So that kind of so still talking about the fiction side, because predominantly our listeners are fiction authors. We definitely have some nonfiction authors, but another thing that comes up a lot is using real products or real businesses in your work. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about that, where the line's drawn there. I've even read to the point where people are like, never put that someone drinks a Coke, even if it's not in a bad sense, because if that company doesn't like their product in a book like that. So how much truth is in that, and what do we have to worry about?
Well, there's I'm about legal issues and then practical issues. Legally, if you happen to mention that your characters are drinking a Coca-Cola or wearing Nike sneakers, that shouldn't be legally actionable, because unless you're disparaging the trademark. Trademarks, no one's going to confuse your book and could think that your book was put out by Nike by using their trademark. It's part of the atmosphere you're trying to create in your book, or maybe something about your characters, that they drive a Mercedes. That being said, some companies are very aggressive about protecting their trademarks, and they'll send you harassing letters even if they don't really have a legal claim. And I've also heard that some publishers are so nervous about this, and they don't want to make the judgment call of when it's okay to use a trademark and when it's not, that they don't let any trademarks be used. And this is traditional publishers. I would say that if it's important to your character or your work that you mention a trademark, because the fact that this character used this particular product is important for your character or your plot, go ahead and use it. as long as you're not disparaging it or making it look bad. And even then, if you are using it, chances are the worst that will happen is you'll get a letter demanding that you change it. And if you're, especially if you're self-publishing, it's very easy to change it in all your copies going forward.
Okay, that makes sense. And like you said, I know when we were first writing back in 2012, also the first book that we intended to self-publish, we had someone beta read it, and it mentioned, products by name. It wasn't important. It was just what they were eating and drinking. And the person in reply was like, "I wouldn't put this in there. You better change Coke to soda or cola or whatever." And we did, but I always wondered kind of where that line is drawn. So.
Well, that's very cautious, but there are going to be times where a writer doesn't want to change it because it's important that this character has that particular watch or that particular hat, because it says something about that character. And in writing, you take some risks, and that's not a terribly large risk. In most instances, if you're not disparaging the product and you're not making it sound as if Coca-Cola has endorsed your book. That's the other line, but that would be a very extreme line to cross.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine that in fiction, how you would say something like that you were promoting it. But so that's good to know, though. That kind of takes some weight off a lot of people's shoulders, probably, because it is kind of hard sometimes when some of these products have became so, and companies became so common, like household things that, where I grew up in the Southeast, we called every soda Coke. So there's things like that it's really hard to do. So, all right, just two more questions, and I'll pass you over to Lindsay. So one of them, you were talking about the business liability insurance for authors, and that was predominantly for nonfiction, especially if they're talking, like you said, about businesses or companies, corporations. Is there any, maybe the most common reason why fiction authors would need that, or is it rarely needed by fiction, and in what case would a fiction author want that?
If a fiction author was writing a book where you had people were fairly recognizable and you're having them do criminal conduct or particularly damaging conduct, then you ought to consider having insurance. It could, and if you have, as I say, the crazy Uncle Joe exception, if you have somebody in your family or your friends who always thinks that a book's about them and they're likely to get all agitated and take legal action, and it's groundless, you might consider doing that as well, because what insurance can help on are those crazy cases where someone comes out of the woodwork and they really don't have any case. But that's what the insurance company, they'll let them deal with it. That's what you're paying them to do.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think immediately of those books, even mainstream published books that are parodies, like really blatant parodies of someone. And it seems, I'm sure all of those traditionally published books have this insurance, of course. But if you're a self-published author and you're doing something like a parody book or something, I guess it would be really important to grab that. So.
Yes, you should take some time. If you're doing a parody book about celebrities or the very wealthy, I always think when it comes to defamation claims and privacy claims, it's less about the law and it's more about deep pockets. That I talk about it as being the factor of money times emotion. The more money that's involved, the less emotion is required to bring a lawsuit. But if there's a lot of emotion involved, then even if there's very little money involved, that increases the likelihood of a lawsuit. But lawsuits are expensive, and most people, even if they say they're going to sue you, by the time they go to an attorney wants $10,000 to get started, they get over it. So that's why I'm saying if you're going after big oil, big food, big celebrity, a deep pocket, that actually has more to do with your risk than what you're saying. It's, who potentially could be coming after you. This isn't a legal theory. This is just how it works in the real world.
Right. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. So, anyone out there that's thinking about, I've seen some self-published works. There's self-published works of everything, right? So, I've seen things out there of people writing parody from a celebrity, same name, kept the same name and everything. It's like, how do they get away with this? And so, if you're doing that, definitely grab the liability insurance. It sounds like so.
Yeah, but keep in mind that even your target of the parody may not want to bring a lawsuit because it only calls more attention to the book. The book might not sell at all, and then if suddenly this celebrity is making a big deal about it, the author might make 100 times more money after the controversy. So the way they get away with it is that people weigh the benefits and the costs of litigation and then often just look the other way.
Right. All right. So last question before I pass you on to Lindsay, and this one kind of, in a way, goes back to using products and things like that. One of the another thing that you see on forums and things a lot, and again, we don't have to get into this completely because I know it's pretty deep as well, is using things like lyrics, quotes, or even song titles. So can we talk a little bit about that? I know, again, you get lots of varying advice from people that may or may not know, so I wanted to see what you can use already and what you need to go get permission to use.
Okay, and I just want to get this out there, I've written 2 99-cent ebooks that are actually free also on my website. One's called How to Use Memorable Lyrics Without Paying a Fortune or an Attorney or lawyer. And the other one is How to Use Eye-Catching Images Without Paying a Fortune or a Lawyer, because I get these questions a lot. I'll start off with the easy one. Yes, you can use titles and you can use the name of the artist. So those you can use. Titles are not protected by copyright. Comes as a surprise to many authors that their book titles are not protected by copyright, but it also means that you may use them. Quotes, if they're not lyrics, generally you can use short quotes without being a problem. This is, I think, kind of a gap in copyright law, because some of those short quotes, like you see on Canva and you see on Facebook, people have these lovely quotes. Copyright considers those too short to be protected by copyright, but if anything, those short quotes, to get something short that means a lot, is the hardest thing to write. So those you can generally use. Some people say 25, 30 words. It depends how long the piece is that you're borrowing from. Lyrics and poems, because they tend to be short and have fewer words, there's much less leeway. And with lyrics, they tend to be owned by music companies instead of the artists themselves. So with lyrics, they tend to be very aggressive about protecting their copyright. And so I recommend, if you're using any more than a few lines of a song, a few words of a song, that you try to get permission. In many instances, it's not that expensive to get permission. If it was really important that certain lyrics were at the beginning of your chapter or in your book, you might be able to get permission for $40 or something in that scale. There isn't a consistent pricing. Some will be $4,000, but it's amazing how many are very, very affordable, particularly for self-published books, because they know that you're not making a lot of money from the typical self-published book, and so they don't ask for very much. And with images, it's the same thing. Images, it's as easy now to search for images online as it is to search for strings of words. So if you borrow an image, your chances of getting found out are going up all the time.
That makes sense. So really quick with the images, and so are you talking about mainly using images that you find in your books are also like anywhere. Like if you use them on your website or blog without accrediting where it's from, is that just are you just as
That's,
likely?
that's also an infringement. If you're using it in your blog or on your website and you haven't gotten permission, you are using someone else's work. And depending on who that person is, they may not care, or they may care quite a bit. You just don't know.
Right, that makes sense. So always better to play on the safe side. So, all right. So I will pass you over to Lindsay's for her segment or her question. So, but I did want to say that that really clears up the song portion that you can use the titles. That's good to know because we've also skipped using titles or vaguely reference a song without saying the title. So it's good to know that you can use the titles.
Yes,
And
you
I
can.
never knew that some of the lyrics were so cheap. So that's kind of cool too. So.
If you download from my website, I provide links on where to go to get permission. I try to make it as easy as possible.
Awesome. So, and for anyone listening, watching live, or listening later on, I will put the links to all of this to Helen's website, where you can find all this at thewritingpodcast.com/19. So, all right, Lindsay, I know you're wanting to you unmuted, so you're wanting to ask some questions. So I will let you take it away.
Just getting ready over here, warming things up. But yeah, it's good to know that I write science fiction and fantasy, so I get to avoid all this stuff by just making everything up. But good to know for those who don't have that experience. So the first thing I want to ask you is kind of the big thing I get asked all the time as somebody who writes about self-publishing is, do you need to file a copyright for your books? And if so, how do you go about doing that?
Sure. Well, you own a copyright in your work as soon as you put it down on paper or on your computer. It used to be you had to mark it and register it for it to be valid, but nowadays it's automatic as soon as you put your words down into a fixed form. However, it makes sense that once your work is fairly far along, that you do also register it with the U.S. Copyright Office. And if you're in another country, you'll probably have the equivalent in your country. The reason to register it, it's an extra step and it gives you extra protection. You can't sue somebody for infringement unless you register the copyright with the U.S. Copyright Office. Plus, if you do it quickly, within 3 months following your first public publication, then you can also recover attorney's fees and what are called statutory damages, which is an automatic award to you whether or not you prove you lost any sales. And statutory damages can go as high as $150,000. So, and the other thing is registering your book is inexpensive. It costs $35 if you do it online, and then you send in 2 copies of your book. And if someone says it's $35 in 35 minutes, because that's about how long it takes, I think it takes even less than that to go online and register your work.
All right.
So
And when
go
you say
ahead.
2 copies, do you mean 2 physical paperbacks, or are ebooks acceptable?
You can send ebooks, and if you've missed the 3-month deadline, you can still register something 5 years later, 10 years later. So there are ways to upload it by ebooks. When you get to that part of the application online, it will tell you how to upload your work.
All right, good to know as somebody who might have 20 or more titles out there and need to do some catching up. I have found from kind of dealing with scammers and pirates and stuff that the people that are most likely to publish your stuff online, in my experience, tend to be in other countries. Are you protected all with that if you register a U.S. copyright?
You are protected, and you don't have to sue them. You can do what's called a DMCA takedown notice. But I've come to the conclusion that a lot of these sites that say download a free copy of Coyote Wins, that they're scams, but they're not selling Coyote Wins. They're downloading viruses onto people's computers, and they're using our books as bait. As soon as you take down one site, 5 others appear. It seems like it's like whack-a-mole, a game of whack-a-mole, which maybe you two are too young to remember. But I think it's better for writers to spend their time writing more books than trying to chase down these infringers who probably aren't costing you very much money.
All right, I totally remember whacking the moles at I think Chuck E. Cheese had that, I don't know, or at least the fairs.
Yes, it's probably still around.
All right, and I'm just curious, if somebody's writing under a pen name, is it any different for registering copyright? Do they have to prove that that's them or anything?
When you register, there's one of the fields that you fill in is you can register it in your pen name, your real name, or both. And even if you just register it in your pen name because you want to be very secret about who wrote the book, if you're uploading this book onto Amazon or Ingram's to sell it, then they will want to know your real name because they'll want to know your social security number or your employer ID number so they can pay you royalties. So you will be able to prove that you own it. You'll have other evidence.
All right, sounds good. So I guess if most people, if they reach some success with self-publishing, sooner or later you tend to get approached by either a small press or an agent or maybe even a big press. And I was just wondering if you could talk about some pitfalls maybe to look out for and before signing any contracts.
Yes, contracts, writers should learn a lot more about because I think more writers get in trouble by signing bad contracts than any other way they get in trouble. I see contracts from small publishers who really can only publish your print book and maybe your ebook, but they'll hand you a contract in which they say they get rights to your book in audio book form, movie rights, merchandising rights, if you have stuffed animals made from your book. And I think that's overreaching by these small publishers, that they're trying to get rights that they have no way they can actually use. You should think about owning a copyright as owning an apartment building, and you have lots of little apartments. You only want to give each person the apartment they can actually use. And you want to keep all the other rights you can. For instance, for the small publisher who's only doing it in English and only distributes in English-speaking countries, you wouldn't want to give that small publisher translation rights. So authors if they've gone the self-publishing route and then they've been approached by a traditional or a small publisher, they don't want to make waves. They feel like they finally got their foot in the door. You should read things carefully, get some help, and negotiate. I don't think it's going to hurt you if you negotiate from a knowledge, reasonably and knowing what you're talking about. You're not going to hurt you're not going to be seen as aggressive or greedy. You're going to be seen as smart.
All right, and is that kind of like an IP lawyer that you would want to look for to look over a contract like that?
Yes, or a publishing lawyer, because IP, that could be patent or trademark. You really want someone who's looked at publishing contracts. And there are actually quite a few good books out there. There are more books out there to help the traditionally published writer look at contracts than there are books to help independently or self-published writers. So just like a writer takes the time to study how to plot a novel, take some time and study these contracts. You will be able to understand the things that you need to understand.
All right, definitely good advice. And I originally found you by your blog post on how to spot a rights grab on the book designer site. I was wondering if you could tell us what that is and what to look out for there.
Yes, a rights grab is a contract where you grant the publisher or the contest, because some of these contests do this, all rights to your work in all formats, in all languages, worldwide, for the life of the contract. And they're basically taking, and so that you yourself can't publish it anymore. You can't let people download portions of your book on your website. They're that broad and expansive. And some of these are contests where they're grabbing all of these rights, and you don't even get an advance on them. So that's what we call a rights grab, is when a company that is trying to grab more rights to your book than is customary, or that they can actually commercially exploit. Because a writer only makes money if someone takes their words and takes their story and sells it. But if someone kind of grabs onto a bunch of rights and you can't sell them, you can't sell your audiobook rights because somebody else has it, that's what I call a rights grab. Sometimes it's called an assignment, which is they take everything. And writers don't believe when someone says to you, "Oh, it's standard, everybody signs it." Don't believe it. That's like believing a used car salesman saying the car never needs gas. You just have to be a lot more skeptical.
Definitely. I just hear from so many authors, too, who have had bad experiences with contracts and have stuff locked up indefinitely or can't publish in the same genre when they want to sell.
Oh, yeah, there are options on all your future work. There's a non-competition clause. I give in Self-Publishers Legal Handbook in the back, I actually take some contracts. You can't really see it. And I put the contract language on one column and then an explanation of what it means in the other column. And I do it, phrase by phrase to help writers translate the legalese into useful information. Because it can be intimidating to look at a contract.
Yeah, that sounds like a good resource there. People have to check it out because it's hard to decipher what that stuff means sometimes.
Well, contracts can look like 5,000 words run through a blender. They can be very daunting. Part of what I said in the Rights Grab blog post was to look for the provision of the contract that says license or ownership or rights, and it's often buried. And if you try to read from the beginning to the end, you're going to be worn out by the time you get to the important parts. So go right first off to the important parts of the contract, and I try to explain what those are. And if those are bad, you don't have to read the rest. And usually if those are fair, chances are the rest of the contract is pretty fair.
All right, that's good to know. One other thing that you often get if you're self-publishing and you get to some degree of popularity or you sold X number of books is that you'll get people from other countries interested in buying the foreign rights for your manuscript or series. Is there anything to look out for there? I'm sure there's lots of things to look out for, but...
Well, the first is the size and reputation of the company. If you're going into partnership with them, so you don't really want to go into partnership with somebody with a bad reputation or who may have a wonderful dream but doesn't have the wherewithal to actually pull it off. So you want to research the person or the company that's approached you. There are a few scams going on out there, people saying they want to publish books in China, but no one can find out anything about the companies. So as thrilling as it is to get one of those emails, be aware that it may not be legitimate, that especially when they say, "Oh, this is wonderful, now we need your credit card to hire the translator." So once they start asking you for money to make it happen, your radar should start bleeping and you should start really questioning how legitimate it is.
Right, I assume it's one of those things where the money should only be flowing to the author.
Yes, there are so many things out there where you're asked to, someone wants to do a radio interview with you. But the only way they can distribute it to all the radio stations is if you pay them $5,000. There are so many of those out there. As soon as someone asks for your credit card, as I said, the alarm bell should go off that this is somebody who's trying to sell you something. This is not someone trying to help you.
All right. Well, you should be glad that neither Adam or I tried to get $5,000 from you for being on the show.
No. Most people, the vast majority of people, are honest. Our business world wouldn't work if most people didn't do what they say they're going to do most of the time. I mean, we all tend to get cynical, but because I think we take for granted the fact that most people are mostly honest.
All right, good
That's
advice.
From a lawyer.
One other thing I wanted to ask you before maybe handing you back to Adam to close in about 10-15 minutes is a lot of authors are getting excited by the idea of co-authoring things with other people these days, and I was wondering if you could talk about any advice people before they write something with somebody. What should they think about doing?
The most important thing is to talk out certain issues and get them in writing. And I'll go through what some of those are, but the process of putting your collaboration agreement in writing is very valuable because it forces you to talk about perhaps some uncomfortable things. But it's better to talk about these uncomfortable issues while things are still positive and you have a lot ahead of you. Some of these are, and I actually give a whole list of them in my book. One thing I'd say is, like, first draw a box. What are you working on that's in the box that you both own, and what are you working on that's outside the box that you each own separately? Because some of the assumptions may not be the same. Talk about your work styles. Do you like to brainstorm with somebody, or do you like to write separately? How well do you handle criticism, and how are you going to manage criticism? Your visions for the project. Is this something you want to be a bestseller and you want it to be genre, or do you want something very literary? And how much time are you willing to put into it? The worst friction comes is when somebody is putting in much more time than the other, and that's just going to build resentment. So there's a number of issues to talk about that sound like a prenuptial agreement, and it is very similar to that.
Yeah, I've definitely heard people talking about their business partners, almost like it sounds like they're an old married couple.
They are, and actually I wrote a post also on the Book Designer blog. I think it's called 21 Steps to a Successful Collaboration Agreement. But if you go on the Book Designer and search collaboration agreement, that will come up.
All right, sounds good. Last thing I was wondering about, it's always a kind of an awkward subject, but if you want to if you die someday and want to hand your stuff down to your children, is there anything how should you make sure they're able to continue to sell your books and make money from the work you've done?
Well, copyrights do pass on to our heirs, so you can give it to your children. And in fact, the copyright lasts for 70 years after you pass away. So you may be giving it to your grandchildren and even your great-grandchildren. So it's best to designate somebody as your literary executor. Sounds like a very pompous word, but it's important that you designate somebody who's in charge of your intellectual property and your writing, who understands how to publish or use the writing, exploit it, and who cares about the writing. So many writers, once they pass away, everyone throws out their boxes and their writings because, grandma is kind of embarrassing what she wrote about. And so it's up to the author to appoint somebody who's in charge, who will care about the work. And hopefully it is one of your children, or a sister or brother or a co-writer. It doesn't have to be the same person who's managing the rest of your estate. You can assign somebody completely different.
That's good to know because especially with the self-publishing in the online world now, it can be really, I think, daunting to somebody who doesn't have any experience with it.
Yes, and so yeah, it's called a literary executor, and it's most of us don't like to think about any of these issues, but it would be so tragic for somebody's work to kind of be left with a mess because nobody is in charge, or there are too many people in charge. So appoint somebody to be in charge of your work when you're gone.
All right. Well, one more thing I was thinking of earlier when you were talking about LLCs and saving money on taxes. I know you're not an accountant, but I was wondering if you could, if you have any advice on like kind of when you should, I don't know, at what point that makes sense to do, and like which entity would make most sense for a self-publisher?
Well, even before you're forming an entity, if you treat your writing and your self-publishing as a business, and that means getting a separate employer ID number, which is like a social security number for your business, keeping track of your business expenses, if setting up separate accounts. If you treat it like a business and you have some credible plan to turn a profit, then the IRS will also see it as a business, or may also see it as a business, and therefore if you have losses in your early years, you can offset them against your other income. So let's say in the first year you publish a book, you have $4,000 worth of expenses for editorial and design and marketing, but you only made $1,500. You could take that other $3,500 of expenses and deduct it from your day job income. If the IRS considers your writing just a hobby, they won't let you do that. You can only deduct your writing expenses from your writing income, and you lose all those deductions. So writers should think about, once they're getting into the business of freelancing or writing and you have income coming in, do a little bit of work to run it like a business, and you'll end up being able to deduct your excess expenses from other income.
All right, sounds good.
So, and then when you get to be big money, then you have the problems of success. You should probably then hire an accountant who can help you structure things to save taxes. That's a problem I hope every listener has. It's like, what do I do with this extra $50,000? Right?
Yeah, the IRS is loving me now because I get to send them a lot of money because I don't have any kids or any deductions or anything. So it's a good problem to have, I guess.
It is, except when you have to write that check. It's always a surprise.
Yeah, I wish Amazon just withheld it so you never saw that money and could pretend that it wasn't yours.
Good for you. Good for you, Lindsay, that you have that problems of success.
Yeah, it's a tough life. But I would love to ask you a couple of questions in closing about kind of what you're doing for marketing of your nonfiction. It sounds like that's selling pretty well, and you know, I don't think we've had anybody on to talk about nonfiction yet. So
the best thing I did was contact the big bloggers in the self-publishing area and ask if they wanted free content. And virtually everyone said yes. So I just emailed Jane Friedman, Joanna Penn, Joel Freelander, Nina Amir, and a bunch of others, and explained my book and what I was doing and what the kind of blog posts I could write for them. And so even though I had maybe 10 people following my blog, or no, 100 people following my blog, I was suddenly on blogs that had tens of thousands of people following them. And so that was, I kind of leapfrogged or it over that building the platform and basically used other people's platforms. And probably the biggest, most important thing is I identified a niche that was open in the nonfiction market, a niche I knew I could fill, and then I wrote to fill that niche, which was that self-publishing is booming, and there was no book to help self-publishers deal with the various legal issues. The other marketing is like you have to throw out a lot of seeds and you hope that one of them grows into a tree. It's hard to know what the right thing is. I did hire a publicist, and I don't think it was helpful at all. What was really helpful was offering to write guest posts.
Yeah, I've not heard anybody yet say that $5,000 I spent on a publicist was money well spent. So that's...
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately. Not to, I think the publicists work very hard. I just think maybe they've worn out their welcome, and everyone's heard them sell so many books that doesn't work anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I've just not heard too many success stories from that. Yeah, if you can be online, and especially with the nonfiction, you're solving a problem, and as you said, one that a lot of people haven't blogged about that already. So it definitely seems like that was a good idea.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's about it for me. Adam, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we learned a lot of good stuff here. We're almost at the hour mark, so a lot of questions that I had, and I see all the time, like I said, questions on forums and things, and now I can just link them to our podcast episodes. So I thank you for all your answers and time for sure. So, all right, before we go, would you like to let everyone know where best to find you, and especially to find your book, so they can have this all at hand when they need it?
Sure. I have a website, helensedwick.com, and you can find my book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and it's available both in print and ebook. And my novel's the same thing, print and ebook for Coyote Winds. And I like helping writers. I often take emails and try to help where I can. I do conferences and podcasts. I'm doing this. I'm at the point in my life where I want to give back, and this is one of my ways to give back to writers.
Awesome. And yeah, I noticed on Helen's website she does have a list there of conferences that she's going to be at as well. So the ones I saw were in California. So if anyone's in that area or going to be in that area sometime, you should look at the calendar there and maybe go talk to you there or go listen to you there at least. So I know I'll be checking out the book for sure because there's, like I said, lots of stuff I learned on just this episode. I'm sure there's 10 times that or more in the book. So. And for anyone listening, again, you can find all these links if you don't want to try to type it out while you're listening to us explain where to go. You can always go to thewritingpodcast.com/19. We'll have nice, pretty links to all this stuff. So.
And my title's pretty easy to find. It's Self-Publisher's Legal Handbook. I was going to do a fancier title, but an agent told me that just to keep the title exactly what it is, and she was right.
Yeah, easy to remember for sure. And I don't know, you missed the opportunity to have 30 keywords in your title, though, so I don't know. All right. And again, for everyone listening, if you listened to the last episode, beginning of this one, we are going to be off air for a few weeks, so I'm doing a really long-distance move across the country. But I will keep everyone up to date on our Facebook, our website, Twitter, etc., about when to expect the next episode. So. Again, Helen, thanks for taking the time to come on the show. I learned a lot, and hopefully everyone listening learned a lot as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry that I froze up for a second there. All right, so that's it for us for a few weeks. And again, as always, thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.